Is a little quick tutorial that we're going to do on how to use our Gravit for our current project, getting into working with what's called the pen tool. Okay, so please open your Gravit program and get ready to follow along. All right, so I'm going to go with a new design. I'm going to make my width 10. This is pixels, so I want to change this to inches. I'm going to make my width 10 inches. I'm going to make my height 10 inches. And I'm going to press create. I'm not really going anything crazy. This is just going to be a test page, so we're not really worried about what we're actually creating at this point. We're just going to be going through the process to make sure that we're all on the same page and that we know how to use these different tools. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to start working with what's called the pen tool. Okay, so in Gravit, the pen tool is right up here next to your shape tool. It's called path. They call it the path tool. And with this path tool, we see you have a couple different choices underneath it. We're going to stay with what's called the pen. We're going to click, and we're going to use this pen tool to create a shape on our canvas. Okay, now here's the most difficult thing to understand when you're working with this. This does not work like a pencil, okay, where you just click and you drag and it draws your curves or your lines. The purpose of a pen tool is a pen tool creates individual anchor points. Now remember from the shapes before, our shape project, if we go like this, we have our square, rectangle, and then on, let me make sure this is filled correctly. Do we have a border? Let's add a border on this. That is black. Okay, so with my rectangle right here, my corners have what are called anchor points. Okay, and the anchor points are the edges of my shape. So the line in between is called a path. The corners are the anchor points. When you have a pen tool, your pen tool creates anchor points. So if I'm going to make a rectangle, I'm going to click once, click and release. And now I've made an anchor point. And you see that there's this line extending away from it. Okay, and I can click and drag and make my next point, which I'll make one down here. I'll click and release. Clicking and release is really important because that allows me to have a straight line coming out of my anchor point. I'll click and release again. I'll come up here and see how it kind of locks straight for me. It even gives me a guideline to make sure that I'm going straight. And then when I'm finished, I'm going to come over here, and if you look at my cursor really closely, when I get to that first point that I made, a little circle pops up next to my cursor. And what that circle means is that I am closing up my shape. I'm finishing my shape. If I go out here and I click a point, now it's still an open line, okay, because it's not a closed off shape right here. But if I press undo and I come here to the circle and I go like that, now it is a closed shape. It's not connected anymore, and I have my rectangle. Okay, my shape has 4 anchor points, and I have made this shape. Now I can do other shapes as well. If I wanted to make a triangle, I can go click, drag down here, click, drag over here, click and release, drag up here, click and release, and now I have a triangle. All right, so let's go ahead and take, if you've made that triangle, go ahead and take your arrow tool, what they call this, our selector tool, our pointer, okay? And I'm going to click with my triangle on my pointer, and I'm going to backspace and backspace to get rid of my triangle. Now, once I've made this rectangle, I can manipulate the individual anchor points. It doesn't have to stay a rectangle. So what I can do is I can come up to my selection tools, come down to my sub-select, okay, the white arrow. And with that, I will click on my shape, I will click on a corner, and now look at this anchor point is filled with blue. All of these anchor points are filled with white. That means this anchor point is selected and these ones aren't. And with that being said, I can click and I can drag on my anchor point and I can adjust it. I can click and release to select this anchor point and adjust that one. And then I can click and move these all around. So with me right now, take your rectangle, click and release to select one point, and then I'm going to turn this shape into like a kite-shaped diamond. So go like this, and then I'm going to go like this, and that kind of works. Okay, easy as that. I have been able to create my shape. Now, say I have this shape, and I want to turn this shape into a triangle. Well, some would say, oh, it's easy, Reynoso. All you do is select the bottom one and press backspace. Exactly. Nice and easy. Now I have gotten rid of that anchor point, and I can move this into a triangle. But what if I want to turn it into a different shape? Say I want to take this triangle, and I want to make it into a star. Well, now what I can do is I can take this triangle, I'll line it up, and then I'm going to take my pen tool, my path tool, and I'm going to add anchor points. So if you look at my cursor, there's a little X next to it, and that means, hey, I'm ready to start an anchor point somewhere. If I go to my path, how does that cursor change? Well, now it's a plus sign. So I can come over here and add 3 anchor points, really as many as I want. I can come over here and add 3 anchor points. And then I come down here and add 1 anchor point. Now, my shape hasn't changed at all. It still looks the same. I just have more anchor points on it. So now I can go back and grab my white arrow again. I can click on 1 anchor point, and I can pull that out. And I can pull this out. And I can pull this up. And now you see, I've turned my triangle that I initially had into a star. Now that I'm here, I can do all those same things that I did before. I can take my star, and I can change the fill color of my star. I can change the stroke, or I can even change the stroke size of my star. So I can play with this a whole bunch of different ways. Okay? From this point, I can continue to mess with this, and I can make it into a new shape. Let's say, what if I go like this? And I take this way. I'm just kind of messing around right now. Oh, look how that worked out. I'm taking my star and made it a Z, because apparently stars and Z's both have the same amount of edges and corners. So that's going to go into our next little lesson here. Go ahead and press backspace. Get rid of your star or your letter that you made. And we're going to use our pen tool to create a block letter. Okay. The only requirement that I have is the block letter has to have straight edges. So a capital I, a capital F, a capital H, a capital Z. Any of those have straight edges. I want to stay away from like a C or a capital D or a capital B or something like that. Okay, so I am personally going to make an I because it's the first letter of my first name. So I'm going to start right here, and I'm going to click, and then again, I'm going to move this line to where I want to go. Act like you're drawing it out with a pencil. So if I go across the top of my eye to here, I'm not going to go back here to the bottom of this little lip of my eye. Okay? Because now I'm crossing across myself, and it doesn't work out well that way. I need to act like I have a pencil in my hand, and I'm drawing my block letter I all around the outside edge. So follow along with me if you would like, or try your own letter as I'm doing this. Click and release. Come over here, click and release. Click and release. Click and release. Click and release. I'm kind of staying within my bounds that it's setting for me. Doesn't have to be perfect. There you go. Now I'm going to fill this with the color so you make sure we can see the whole thing. And I will give it a black stroke as well. Oops. I don't want that one. No. There. Okay. There we go. There's my eye. Okay. So here's my eye. Now, what I need to do is I need to take this I, or take your H, or take your L, or take whatever you've made, and you're going to turn it into a W. So, watch how I'm going to turn this one into a W. It's going to take some time. You're going to have to kind of mess around, but you're going to have to add points and delete points, or you should have to. So let me take my white arrow, and I'm going to go click on one of these corners. There you go. And I'm going to come up here, pull this over, and I'm going to start stretching this thing around to make my W. Now, it's important that as I go, I don't jump from this point down to this point. You can, but you might confuse yourself. I would just take one point to the next. So I'll come down to here, and then I'll come over to here. This will be up in the middle of my W. This will be down this side of my W. I'll come over to here. I'll come way up top over here. Line this one up on this side. Come down. Up. Over. Oh, I need one more point. So I'm going to add my point like this. And then I can click and drag that one down. There you go. Have a W. Remember, if you need to delete points from the letter you had before, which I don't think you should, unless you did maybe a Z. Yeah, they're all have pretty small amount. I think maybe if you did E. If you did an E, you might have to delete a point. But if you have to delete a point, say your project ends up looking like this, and you have like these two extra ones that you need to get rid of, all I need to do is you can grab my pen tool, and I can hover over it like I add my points. See how there's a plus sign right here? Well, if I hover over a point that's already made, it'll turn into a subtraction sign, and you can delete it that way, or you can just select it with this and delete it. Okay, but now I have my W. Now I'm understanding how to work this thing. Okay, so that's how we use a pen tool and how we make our straight lines, straight edges. Okay, please do me a favor, click on that, delete it. Oh, I'm so sorry. All that hard work that we did. I know, I understand. The last part of this is to go into starting to work with curves. Okay, so straight lines are fun, straight lines are easy, but curves really step up our game in terms of being able to design different things. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our pen tool again, and instead of clicking and releasing to make my straight line, I'm going to click and I'm going to hold my mouse. And as I'm holding my mouse down, I'm going to drag out, and you see what pulls out are these two little lines with little dots on the end of them, and we call these handles. Here's a vocab term for us, okay? These are handles. And as I pull this handle out, you see it I can rotate it all the way around. Well, what this does is if I want to draw a line to my right, I'm going to pull my handle out to my right. And now here's my line. But what happens is this line is basically like a piece of steel extending out from my anchor point. And the handle is making sure that my steel starts going to the right. So if I pull it down, you see how there starts to be a curve, like I'm bending a piece of steel or I'm bending a piece of wood. Okay? And that handle means that it's going to always go this way first. If I go all the way back like this, see how there's still a curve there because it's bent really tight. If I come over here and I click and I drag while I hold my mouse, you see that that curve extends like that. If I come over here, I'm going to click and drag. I'm going to come over here, bend my piece, click and drag. Come over here, bend my piece. Oh, I'm going to go back to my start. Click and drag, but bend it like that. And now I have this weird amoeba-like shape, okay? All of the same things work. I can still fill it with whatever color I want. I can still put a stroke color on it if I would like. I can still come back with my white arrow, click on an anchor point and move that anchor point. But I can also, in hindsight, come through with my anchor point that I move, and I can also adjust the handles. So I can move these handles around if I would like. If I want this curve to come out this direction more to the left, I can take this handle and go like this. but you see it's also adjusting the bottom side of that handle. Or I can click this handle up here and pull and drag that to my left to bend that piece out this way. Okay, it's definitely going to take some time. It's the weirdest part of Illustrator. It's going to take some time to try to figure it out. But when it's all said and done, it ends up making your stuff look really nice and clean because you'll have nice, easy transitions between your shapes. Okay. The other thing to understand when you're working with this, let me delete this, is when you're using this path tool and you're trying to create curves, the least amount of anchor points you have, the better and cleaner your shape is going to look. For instance, if I'm going to make some waves, like wavelengths, and I like to think about these in wavelengths. For instance, if I'm going to make a capital P, I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, using my straight lines, I could go 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. But we all know when we're done with this, that doesn't look like a great P because it's all kind of choppy in here, right? So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to use my pen tool, and I'm going to click and drag, click and drag, click and drag, click and drag, and now there's curves. Now it still looks kind of bumpy though, because I have a lot of anchor points. I really only need maybe one anchor point, and I need to not change this initial anchor point. So let me show you what I'm talking about. I like thinking about these in wavelengths. If I'm going to make a wavelength, that means like a path that looks like this. It goes up and down and up and down. I'm going to start with my anchor point, and I'm going to pull up. I'd like you to try to do this with me. Then where my first wavelength is going to be, my mound, I want to make an anchor point at the middle of the peak, which would be up here. So I'm going to click and I'm going to drag to my right. So see now what I've done. That first one was dragging straight up. This next one I'm going to drag to my right. Now to make the valley, the lowest part of this, I'm going to drag all the way down like here somewhere. And I'm going to click and drag to my right again. Continuing to go to my right because that's the direction that my wavelength is going to go. Then I'm going to go again up to my peak, drag to my right, down to my valley, drag to my right, and then I'm going to come back up to here, and press and release, and now I have my wavelength. We see how smooth it is because this really only has, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 anchor points. It makes it really nice and smooth. Okay? So we're always looking for our peaks and our valleys. Now they might not always be vertical and horizontal. Okay? We might get to a situation where we are looking at our peaks being to the right and our values being to the left. But really what I'm looking for is that the most farthest reaching spot is what we're looking for to put our anchor point. So let's go back to that capital P. I got my pencil. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. Now with this P, the little belly of this P, where is the farthest reaching point going to be? Probably right about here. So I'm going to click and I'm going to drag down. Oh, I don't want to drag down because that's against where I'm trying to go, the direction. I want to drag up. Perfect. I will come to about right here. I'll release. And I'm going to come back over here. I'm going to click and I'm going to drag this because I want the top of that P to look correct. Okay? Now, this obviously is a problem, but we can get rid of it. Remember, our handles are what makes our curves out of our anchor point. So, if I select my arrow, my sub-select arrow, my white arrow, and I grab this handle, I can take the handle and I can drag it and move it all the way back to the anchor point, which gets rid of it. I'll move that after. Okay, now I'll move this up. And now because there's no handle on this backside, there's now no curve. So now I have my straight P. If I want to make the inside of the P, I will just make a capital D. 1, 2. I'll come out here, click and drag, come back in here. I'll click once, and I'm good. There's my capital P. Okay, so now we've used anchor points to create curves. We've used anchor points to create straight lines. We should be all right with where we are. Here's the last little test, okay? And I'm going to show you one other thing when I go through this one. But probably the hardest letter to make is a capital S. So I'm going to make a capital S and let you see kind of how that goes, okay? So here we go. I'm just going to walk through this. You can follow along if you'd like, or just kind of watch and see if you're still kind of catching on with us. I'm going to start off with this thing with setting this color right away, okay? So I'm going to set the color of my shape, and then I'm going to start with the top curve of my S. So I'm going to go right here. I'm going to make this little line. I'm going to start with the top curve of my S, so I'm going to make a little line on the top of the S, go from here to here. I've just clicked and released at this point because I want that line to be straight. Now I'm going to come to where my peak of my S is going to be, which would be right about here. And I'm going to click and drag. Now, you see what's happening? Because I have my color, my fill color already selected, it's trying to fill my shape color for me. That's fine. Don't get freaked out. Just understand that's what it's doing. So it's made this line go from my first point to my most recent point, and it's filling with everything in between. It's going to continue to do that unless I change it, which is fine. So I'm going to come from here, and I'm going to take this down to this side, and I'm going to click, and I'm going to pull a little bit and release. And then it's going to curve down here. So I'm going to click, pull, release. I'm going to come down here, click, pull, release. Come down to the bottom of my S, and I'm going to come back up here to where kind of this other flat spot would be. Come over here. See, this is going to be an issue for me, but we'll come back and fix it later. Also, my color looks off. That's totally fine. It's just continuing to stretch from my first point to my most recent point. Now from here, I'm going to come down to my biggest valley, my lowest spot, and make a big bottom here. Come over here and go up. And see how it's kind of getting uniform. This point to this point, this point to this point. Probably going to put one right about here also. Come here. Top here. And then let's pull it back down to here. Okay? There's my S. Now there are 2 spots I want to fix. So I'm going to zoom in actually to give us a little closer look. And I'm going to come with my white arrow, and I'm going to come here first. Okay? So we've already messed with this before. I can take this if I would like, click on this handle, drag it all the way back. Let's get rid of it, and then readjust this handle down here. That's one way I can do that. Another thing that I can do, though, with this point up here, is I can break off this handle. Now, that means I can move this handle independently from this handle. So, if I go like this to flatten this out, that obviously doesn't work because it messes up my S right there. But over here in the appearance, we have our joint, which shows right now our joint is set to asymmetric, which means if you move one side, it moves the other. And then we have a disconnected joint, or we have a mirrored joint, or any other things. I'm going to go to a disconnected joint. If I click on disconnected, what that does is that takes this joint that I already have selected and makes it a disconnected joint, and now I can move this independently. See how it doesn't affect this one anymore. I can take this line, I can even go all the way in here if I'd like to, okay? But I'm not going to. I'm going to flatten it out like that. And then now I have my S. I might come down here and fix some of these things. This is kind of sharp right here. And usually when you have a sharp edge, it means your handles are pretty small. See, this one is a nice, smooth, big curve because the handles that I have here are pretty long, pretty wide. But this one's really sharp. So I can just take this and go up, and take this one and go down, and that rounds it out a lot more. Okay, so your assignment for right now is going to be play with this. Okay, play with this tool, make a face, make a character, try to create something. Remember, you can still use your layers, and I can make new layers and layer things, put things on top of others. But go ahead and play with this, and then keep your eye open for our next project, which I'm going to have an image provided for you that you are going to have to outline. Okay, so this first project is a little one. We'll have it due middle of next week, so you can play around with it this week and this weekend. And then next week we will work on outlining our other image. Please look for that video tutorial coming up soon. Okay, so remember too, because we had an issue with this last project, or a couple of us did. When we're saving this, we're not necessarily saving it. You're going to go to File, and you're going to go down to Export. And when you go to Export, you're going to come down to Scalable Vector Graphics, or SVG. Okay, and when you click on that, if you look down here on the bottom, it automatically saves it down here to your Downloads folder. Usually is where it goes. Okay, if I click on this little arrow, I can click Show in Folder, and then it'll pop up my untitled. I would then click on this and title it. This is like what my, say Reynoso robot, if this were my last robot project, and press enter, and then that file you can turn in to me. Okay, so with that being said, hope you guys are doing good. Hope you're enjoying learning some of this stuff and start making some cool things. Also, if you're playing around with this and make some cool logos or designs, send them my way. I'd love to see what you're working on. All right, hope you're doing well. Roll Tide.